So it's a pleasure tonight to welcome a new face, a new person, entirely new person in fact, it's not just his face that's new, to speak to us here at NAASR. And I must thank, first and foremost, Judy Sarian, our NAASR board member. I don't know where she went. She's here somewhere anyway, because it was through Judy's connections that we were able to get Nick to be here tonight. So Mr. Nick Pittman, our speaker tonight, grew up the road in Cambridge, and he studied economics at Reed College. Worked in environmental and economic consulting before going to Armenia with the U.S. Peace Corps in March 2016. He lives, when he's not here, in a rural village in Lori, Marz, and works with a small local NGO as a community and youth development volunteer, helping his coworkers develop and implement projects focused on youth empowerment and assisting the NGO in organizational development. So it seemed like a great opportunity to hear about some things that are going on in Armenia from someone who was there on the ground and involved in a different way than perhaps many of us are used to hearing about. So it's a real pleasure to turn things over to Nick. Great, thank you.
So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much to the wonderful folks at NAASR for having me here and organizing this. It's a real pleasure to be here. Apart from that, yeah, again, thank all you guys for coming. None of them are here. I would also just like to give a big thank you to everyone in my community in Armenia, my host family, my organization there, just for providing so far just a very wonderful experience and being wonderful and hospitable folks. I think some of them might watch the video later, so okay, so just as a quick summary of this, I'm going to aim to talk for about 45 minutes, might run a little longer depending on how long the anecdotes go, and then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. I'd ask that you hold all just kind of clarifying questions till the end. Can everyone hear okay back there? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll talk for a little bit about myself, about the community where I live, about our organization. And then my talk is broken down into kind of 3 categories. They'll all kind of bleed together, and I'll kind of talk about everything at once. First, I'll start with challenges for me in this work, both challenges doing the work itself and, living as an American volunteer in a rural Armenian community. After that, I'll talk about what I and some friends have identified as what we feel are good opportunities for work in Armenia, either in the nonprofit sphere or elsewhere, and then just talk about some general lessons that I feel like I've learned from the work. After that, I'll have a few moments for some funny anecdotes and some just notes about culture and language that I enjoy, and then I'll talk briefly about, excuse me, other Peace Corps supported projects that kind of run an interesting spectrum of stuff, and if you guys are interested in getting involved in those in any way, you can let me know. Let's see, just a disclaimer before I begin. All opinions presented here are mine personally and do not represent the positions, views, or intent of the United States government or United States Peace Corps. Got it. I would also say, so as I talk, I'm trying as much as possible to make this about my own experience, my own, cultural thoughts and realizations. I will try to generalize as little as possible. That said, if I do make a generalization beyond my own experience, it's because there are enough of us volunteers around the country, I've talked to enough other people, I've seen enough other similar NGOs to mine that sometimes I do feel comfortable making certain generalizations. So, just a note about that. So yeah, just a little bit of background about me. That's me. On the left is my Peace Corps friend Mary, whose parents actually came down from New Hampshire tonight to listen, so thank you guys for coming. And in the middle here is Armenia's 2nd gold medal winner since independence, Artur Alexanian. I think I got his name right. Greco-Roman wrestling. Mary and I were in Gyumri and we're walking by a bookstore where we saw a little crowd gather, and I was like, hey, I recognize that guy from the news. So we took probably what for him was about his 1,000th picture of the day. I still remember it was on the news when he got back into Gyumri around like 2 a.m. from the Olympics, and there was just like a parade around the town square, and everyone understandably was incredibly excited that he'd come back. Okay, so a little bit about Peace Corps in Armenia. Peace Corps has been in Armenia for about 25 years now. We actually just celebrated the 25th group coming in, well, just last June. In total right now there are about 70 volunteers in the country over 2 years. That's 2 different groups. And within those groups we're broken down into 2 sectors, TEFL, so English teaching, and what I am, community and youth development volunteers. The CYD volunteers are about 1/3 of it, and the TEFL groups are about 2/3. As Peace Corps policy, there are no volunteers in Yerevan, apart from occasional what's called response volunteers, which are a little different, don't need to go into that. The idea being that we ideally go to more underserved communities where different, more what we say like traditional aid organizations might not work. So, we do have volunteers, for instance, in Gyumri, Bonator, etc., fairly larger communities, but we also have English teachers in, I think the smallest village is 150, someone way down in Sunik, Marz, in a pretty small village. So yeah, I mean, Mark gave a pretty good rundown of my background. I studied economics in college, worked in consulting for a little bit, and then headed to Armenia 2 Marches ago, so it'll be 2 years at the end of this March. In total, what we do as volunteers is we have 10-week training, and then we swear in as volunteers for 2 years, so I'll be done at the very end of May, start of June. So that's a bit about me, a bit about our community, Margahovi. We are up in Lorimars, though we're very close to the Tavush line. We're pretty much right smack dab in the middle between Bonamzor to the west and Dilijan to the east. An interesting little side note about Margahovi is we're right in between 2 Malakan villages, so these 2 small Russian communities. So that's pretty interesting being right there. They're very interesting communities. I don't know much about them, they're very insular, but my host dad is friends with some of them. It's a primarily agricultural community in terms of work, and because of that, not because of that, but like many other rural communities throughout the country, there's not a whole lot of other work to do, so a lot of young men work abroad, generally in Russia. So there's a lot of moving back and forth for work, and unfortunately more and more families moving to Russia full-time, or 10 or 11 months of the year, just coming back for military, stuff like that. So population loss in that way is a big problem. For anyone who lived in Armenia or visited in the Soviet era, you might know it by its old name, Hamza Chiman. That's what people in Armenia over the age of 30 tend to know it by. So, but apparently not much recognition of that. So, Margahovi. And this is where we are. Yep. In between, yeah, Lermontov is one of the Russian villages. So, right in between Bonazor and Dilijan we are. So, a bit about my organization. As I said, I'm a community and youth development volunteer. I work with a small grassroots organization called the Margahovi Youth Center. On the left, in the middle, is my direct, official work counterpart, Emilia Martirosyan. She is the founder and director of the youth center. Our mission is, kind of broadly speaking, development of the community by youth for youth, and I'll get into a little bit about some of the projects we've done. Emilia started the NGO kind of non-formally about 5 years ago and officially registered it 2 years ago. So she is in her mid-30s, she has a couple of daughters, another one on the way at the start of May. Her background is in education, teaching, and she's also on the community's board of elders. So she's very involved in the community. I'm not totally sure when she sleeps. She has so many other responsibilities. The fact that she's doing this work that we do that she is so incredibly dedicated to is remarkable just based off all of her other responsibilities. So she is an incredibly inspiring, hardworking, smart woman, and I'm lucky to be working with her. And then the other 2 women are folks who we work with a lot through our NGO. Our NGO has no regular income stream, and so no full workers. Everyone it's all on a volunteer basis. On the left is Mariam. She's 20. She is our village dance teacher. She also has some kind of computer programming certificate, and in her free time as a side business, for weddings and parties, she carves these incredible statues out of fruits and vegetables. So she is a very interesting person. And then the other woman is Lena, who's about 30, and she's our village karate teacher. I think in all of Armenia there must be about tops 5 or 6 female karate teachers, so that should just tell you something about her drive and stubbornness and just not really caring about what other people think that she does. So it's a great bunch of people to work with. Let's see. So yeah, I've touched on this a little bit. the way I think of our organization is research poor but personnel rich. We have no regular funding streams and we have no official space at the moment. Most of our planning and organizing work happens out of Emilia's living room, and you'll see the pictures of that later. And we have some space. There's a very little kind of old art school library building in the village, and we can use their rooms when we want to put on an event or have a seminar or something like that. But as I said, resource poor, but I work with 3 and sometimes other incredibly hardworking, smart, just creative people who are a real joy to work with, so it's a good organization. Some current projects we're doing, we kind of regularly do various youth seminars. We had one a couple months ago working with the kids on kind of basic tenets and ideas of project design and management. We've talked with the kids about PR before in kind of a very holistic sense. Everyone in Armenia is on Facebook, so we just like kind of planting these ideas in these kids' head early to, hopefully they'll be successful NGO workers themselves one day. We also recently, at the start of December, had a 4-day, very successful camp that we implemented for girls in our village. We called it GLAD Camp, Girls Leadership and Development. That was a combination of funding through Peace Corps / the old Michelle Obama Let Girls Learn Fund, and money from private donors. So that was a 4-day camp focusing on emotional and mental health, and healthy coping mechanisms. So a lot of those topics are fairly taboo, often worldwide, but especially in Armenia. So we were focusing on healthy ways for girls to deal with stress. We talked about team building, we talked about healthy expression through art. We'll see some pictures of this later. But we're very proud of the camp and it was a great success, so that's kind of our most recent flagship project. We also assisted on the organizational side in the renovation of our school gym, which happened with very generous donations from the local Mirab family, who's also supported the Armenia Tree Project in our village. They have a nursery that they established, and ATP, the Tree Project, helped a lot organizationally in that too. Excuse me. We've partnered with the Tumo Center, the nearby Tumo Center in Dilijan, to work on tech projects for the kids. It's a really cool place. And we also were very lucky to have nearby in Dilijan the International Baccalaureate School, UWC, United World College Dilijan, which was established 3 or 4 years ago maybe. So we've done some cultural exchanges with them that we've organized, so it's been great. Right now we're working on fundraising for our own space. Again, there will be a picture in here later of this, but there's a space in the village's old community center that the mayor, who is very supportive of our work, promised to us. The village will help a little bit to renovate, but we're working on finding and gathering funds to renovate that to have kind of our own official office space. So that's the organization as a whole. What I do is I help with all of these projects. I also help with, in particular, organizational development aspects. So that's, working on accounting and organizing. We have so many documents. How do we organize these right? How do we, set up the workspace so that to be most efficient, stuff like that. Some really specific skills development training. As I head back, I'm going to be doing workshops on things such as PowerPoint, LinkedIn for professional purposes, Google Docs. Google Docs has a lot of potential for helping small NGOs like this, where you can just keep all your documents online on a laptop and not have to worry about things getting lost. And then I also work with everyone on English. Mariam and Lena speak pretty limited English, so I work with them on that. And then I work with Emilia on her spoken English, but also in particular her written English, so kind of professional grant writing, for instance. So yeah, that's a quick overview of our organization and the work we do. This is kind of my extended host family, including my parents up on the left. So just to the right of my mom is Emilia. I live with her parents, who are kind of over here. Their names are Vartush and Lendrush. Lendrush has, I think, my favorite Soviet-era name. It means Flag of Lenin. In the upper right is my host brother Arsen. And then in front of Emilia, her sister Anna, and then their various daughters. So I live with Lendrush, Vartush, and Arsen. But it's a big Armenian family compound, so everyone's always over all the time for coffee or just hanging out after school, so it's a very nice setup. Okay, so that's some background. Now I'm going to talk about the various challenges I've faced, as I said, both in the work and in just the lifestyle there. And where applicable, I'm also going to talk about either silver linings of those challenges or ways in which I've tried to work through those. Okay, not surprisingly, one of these big challenges is language. Emilia speaks pretty good English. We communicate in about half English, half Armenian. But my host family and the other folks I work with speak no English, so with them it's all Armenian. It's just on a daily basis can be difficult when both you're not totally sure you're understanding things correctly, you're not sure what you are trying to say in Armenian is being understood correctly, and it's a difficult language. So, if I'm tired, if I'm frustrated, if I'm in an emotional mood, it can be a lot of work to speak the language effectively, and so it can be tiring. That said, it's continuously interesting and stimulating to be immersed in another language. I feel pretty proud of my abilities, and it's cool that Emilia and I speak half and half, and we'll lapse in and out, we'll switch languages mid-sentence. So that's really satisfying, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but it's also, I enjoy the language a lot. There's a lot of fun idioms, a lot of good barbon, that's the slang, and just as someone who's really interested in languages, I love talking with other volunteers about how different things are in different parts of the country. I've been to Shirok, Marz, and it's, difficult to understand. I feel like there it's almost a mix of they speak Central Armenian, almost Western and Eastern kind of mashed together, so it's one of the really cool things to me about Armenia is how in such a small country you can have such linguistic diversity. Everyone talks about how no one can understand anyone from Karabakh, for instance. Just as an example. So that's one challenge. This is a picture from our pre-service training, not my group, but the following group. It's 10 weeks long, the training, and every morning we have 4 hours of language lessons, so useful but also very intense and tiring. Planning differences, / kind of the timeline on which people think. This is a picture from Emilia's living room. This is kind of a standard work scene for us. Emilia's older daughter, Liana, is working studiously for the moment in the background, and her younger daughter, Shahane, is hamming it up for the camera. Their roles could easily be switched in 15 seconds, and then a minute later switched again. It's a very stimulating and enjoyable workspace. There's always something going on, and the cousins live right next door, the in-laws live next door, so everyone's always over, so it's fun. But yeah, this is definitely something that both in the NGO sector and really just anyone, especially as Americans working in the country, you find just people in the country tend to plan on a shorter term basis for a million reasons, cultural, lifestyle-wise, et cetera. And coming in as a volunteer from the US, that can be a challenge. Trying to get people you work with to think on a longer term basis instead of, in this case, what's the grant we can apply for right now? Well, yes, there are grants to apply for right now. How can we talk about building, say a donor base or a more longer term kind of sustainable funding options? That's just one example. For me, it's always important to think just how incredibly long, as I mentioned earlier, Emilia's list of responsibilities is. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a wife, she's on the board of elders, so she has so many things going on in her life that, frequently a meeting will come up last minute, or, she'll have to go into Volunteerism for errands last minute, so it's all about being flexible. The silver lining of that is, I think at this point I've gotten good about, being flexible and accepting a lack of agency in planning. So, maybe I'll go over in the afternoon and we're going to be working on a strategic plan, and then, actually Shahane is having a dance concert this afternoon, so okay, we're going to a dance concert instead, cool. We can come back later in the afternoon or in the evening and do some work on it, so, yeah. So I talked about this a little previously. This is the space that I mentioned in the community center that the mayor has promised for us. This is definitely also a generalization I feel comfortable making for a lot of these similar, more grassroots and Armenian NGOs, is that lack of kind of regular resources. We've gotten grants before. There are a lot of grants out there for people to get, but it's really hard to find kind of that steady income stream to keep regular activities going. I do put lack in quotes because, as said earlier, I do consider our organization fairly resource poor, but very personnel rich, which is to me that's the important thing. You can have a shiny building and a lot of money for programs, but if you don't have awesome local staff who are there because they want to be there and working hard. Like, what do you have? So we're in a great place to build off of, having that kind of core of just really motivated, hardworking, cool local folks. So, winter. This winter has not been nearly as bad. This winter when I left, it was almost fall. It was a little disconcerting. This is a picture from this spot where I lived for a couple months. As I said, I live with the host family now. I also did when I got to the village, but I wanted to try living on my own. I liked Thoreau, or I liked reading Walden a little too much in high school. Wanted to get kind of my individual experience, and you know, timing-wise, that worked out to be in winter. It was one of the coldest winters in 20 years. All the water in the house froze. I was going out to my outhouse. I didn't have a shower. Before I moved out, though, so I was living in my host family's old little village house, and they're wonderful. You know, they said, anytime, if you're cold, if you want, come back whenever you want. I was like, okay, thanks, you know, I'll keep that in mind. So when I did end up coming back, Kim, my girlfriend, you know, at first she was supportive, and then her next comment was, someone in the village is collecting the bet right now. So, probably true. So, you know, winter presents some obvious challenges for life in general, but also work. You know, people just don't want to come out as much. People want to stay by their wood stoves and, you know, be somewhere warm and not venture out into a foot or two of snow. The upside of this, it definitely makes spring sweeter. Like when spring came last year, that was just incredible. And it is, I view it anyway, and Amelia and I are, as a good opportunity to kind of focus our time on more like indoor, individual development work. So Amelia and I, when I go back, have a long list of stuff we'll work on, from her written professional English to, you know, I'm going to teach her how to do survey analysis in Excel and make, you know, those pretty graphics and stuff. So it's a good opportunity to do that. That's kind of the silver lining of no one wanting to come outside, is that, you know, it's a good time to kind of sit inside by her stove and do work on this stuff. So that's winter. So volunteer work stigmas. This is still a complicated topic for me, and I don't fully understand everything behind it. I would also just want to emphasize before I say this that I am not at all saying that people don't come together as like a community to help each other. That is completely the opposite. Like, the sense of community and looking out for neighbors and helping neighbors there is palpable and so strong. I think of this more as people, especially men, are hesitant to do unpaid work, like, visibly. Like, we'll have kids, boys and girls, men, women, come, and like, if we're having kind of a closed-off event, they're fine with that. But this is some work we were doing, putting in like these announcement boards around town that that were provided by a small grant from a local granting organization, and like, it was hard, I think, finding men who would come and help out. My guess is that part of this has to do with kind of the very traditional gender roles in which the man is like the breadwinner and has like the paid work to support the family. So I think because of that, people are hesitant to do very visible unpaid work. But there's still, I still need to kind of get more to the bottom of it. Amelia and I have had a lot of conversations about it, but in part because of, you know, the previously mentioned language barriers and cultural barriers on top of that. I still don't fully understand it. On a related note, we have kind of a general mistrust of the NGO sector in certain places. This picture does not in any way suggest mistrust of the NGO sector. I couldn't find one that like suggested that. This is actually around the time when I got to Margaret Hobie. This is working with a couple other Peace Corps volunteers who'd been previously helping Amelia with organizational development work. So this isn't really a problem in our case. Like, we have very good relationships throughout the town, with the school, with the mayor's office, and such. But I think, from what I've heard throughout the country, there's mistrust of the sector, and this is, I think, too, related to the stigmas related to volunteering. That kind of, to me, boils down to like, oh, you're doing this cool community work, but you're doing it for free? Like, really? Like, you're not, you know, you got this grant, you're not taking some money for yourself? Like, you're really doing this purely out of the goodness of your heart? So I think that's what a lot of it boils down to, is the suspicion of people and their motives in doing, you know, volunteer work for the community for free. Okay, so Soviet mindset. This is a picture I saw on a book in a library in Dilijan, kind of a, I guess, creative reimagining of the flag raising for Iwo Jima. Don't think there were Soviet tanks on it. Not sure. So this shows up in a lot of ways still, more than 25 years later, effects of the Soviet Union. And I've talked to folks at the embassy in particular about this, and they said, our previous thinking was they thought it would kind of be out of the system in a generation, but now they're really like, we really think it's going to be more like 2 generations. And that makes sense, it's, because the teachers who are now teaching in the schools, if they were trained in the Soviet system, that's what they know. So it's definitely leaving, but I think more slowly than a lot of, at least Western observers thought. So this shows up to me in a lot of different areas. I think in the education realm, and I don't see this a whole lot, I hear this from my fellow volunteers in the education realm. You have kind of a lack of creativity and initiative-focused projects in the school system. It's a lot of rote memorization, a lot of if it's an English class, here's something you memorize and you read it to the class, but you might have no idea what it's actually about. There's not that aspect of kind of quizzing your understanding of it and your interpretation. So that's one way. You see it a lot in public spaces. Private spaces are immaculately kept, perfectly clean, people's houses, but because there's no longer in general, a body organizing and cleaning these public spaces, they've fallen into disrepair. And especially, I think, it was mostly in the years directly after the fall of the Soviet Union and kind of the hardest economic times. A lot of these public buildings were stripped. People took materials out of the cultural center, just because they needed them. Things were in really rough shape. Like I said too, I think the lack of interest in volunteering is a little bit related to this, in part because during the Soviet Union there would be weekly days when the word that I would use would be people would be voluntold, come out, we're gonna clean things up, and so I think those enforced volunteer projects had some connection to maybe the stigmas related to that now. And then finally I'd just say, I don't really have this problem because it's a very small organization, but in a lot of bigger organizations and schools you see a very rigid deference to hierarchy and authority and kind of chain of command, and just an unwillingness to do something if you don't have the say-so from your supervisor. You also see it, interestingly, understandably, people over 25 or 30 tend to call communities by their old names from the Soviet era. So for instance, pretty much everyone I know still calls Gyuri Leninakan. Vonanzor was called Kirovakan, so those old names are still in the system. I would say an interesting aspect of this, and the really strong connections between both Armenia and the States, and Armenia and Russia, is that it's kind of neat that by 3rd, 4th grade, kids are learning and writing in 3 different alphabets and 3 different languages. I think kids in general tend to learn Russian a little bit better / more. There's a lot more Russian media consumed, and just more connection kind of on a daily basis, I would say, in the rural areas with Russia, in large part just because there's so much going back and forth between Russia for work. People have families there, stuff like that. So gendered NGO work. This is something that, and again, I feel comfortable making generalizations here, that I find with other male community and youth development volunteers, is that by and large, the NGO sector is mostly women, and just as a result of that, because of gender roles there, because of people's views on basically the impossibility of platonic male-female friendships, I have to be very careful as a volunteer with who I work with and how. For instance, because say Lena and Mariam, they're both young, unmarried women, I couldn't just go over to their house really to do work. Maybe I could, but I would feel uncomfortable anyway. So it's just something we have to keep in mind. I would also say that it means that there are fewer role models for boys. So when people see the NGO sector being mostly dominated by women, it's probably again furthers some of those volunteering stigmas and kind of perpetuates itself. So that's an overview of kind of some of the main challenges I've experienced and other volunteers have also experienced. Okay, so now some opportunities that we've identified over there. So gender-based work for with boys. There's so many incredible projects, and they're all awesome, working on women, young women and girls empowerment in the country. I'll talk about some of those that are Peace Corps related later. There are some that focus on working with boys and young men as well, but so many young educated Armenians I've talked to have identified this as something that they really need more of, because if you're pushing for gender equality, like you have to have it from both sides. Like again, like all the work with girls, young women is awesome, but we need more corresponding stuff on the men's side of things too. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit later about a couple of the Peace Corps projects that focus on working with boys and young men. To creative and initiative-focused work, as I mentioned in the part about the Soviet mindset in the education system. Learning tends to be pretty rote and not, kind of engaging kids' creativity. This is a picture from our GLAD camp that we organized during our part on, I think it was on business development and kind of entrepreneurship. We had the girls come up with business ideas and draw diagrams explaining them and then justify them. So I think this was a business looking at kind of making like a souvenir shop for kind of rural crafts and rural food. So, yeah. And the kids have always responded really well when we've done work like this, or say like art-focused classes. This was another unit from our camp that we just organized where we worked with a local artist in Bonazor. This was a part with clay where, you just give the kids clay and say, make whatever the heck you want, and people definitely took to it and enjoyed it. IT work. There are already some really great organizations doing this work. In the country, TUMO, which has 4 different centers throughout the country, Gyumri, Dilijan, Yerevan, and then Stepanakert in Karabakh. It's completely free, kids come in, they have all these different classes they can take, from graphic design to movie making to music production and other ones. It's an incredibly cool NGO. Co-op, I know, also does, through their Smart Center and Smart Rooms, does tech-related stuff. But particularly to me, this is big from an economic standpoint. Some figures I found said that the tech industry in Armenia is currently growing at an annual rate of about 20%, and by this year, they estimate that it'll be like the main driving sector of the economy in terms of new growth. So just the fact that you have this opportunity here for good, local, kind of well-paying, creative jobs is a really big opportunity that I think, NGOs and other organizations can do even more work to, grow IT skills and interest in kids. So mental and emotional health work. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of stigmas in the country related to mental and emotional health and talking about it. We like to think our camp has addressed some of those. We haven't fully analyzed the follow-up surveys we gave the kids yet, so I can't give you hard numbers yet, but anecdotally speaking, they got a lot out of it. Some of them showed us their journals. We had exercises on journaling, and they showed us some of the stuff they've been writing about and working on processing, and that was pretty cool. During the camp, we also had morning yoga and meditation on 2 different mornings. A yoga teacher from Kapan came up, totally free, and taught the kids just out of the goodness of her heart, and they all really, really liked that a lot. So volunteerism. This is a picture from Dilijan, where they have a very active youth volunteer group that does all sorts of activities throughout the community. There's, like I said, have said repeatedly about the stigmas related to volunteering. I feel like groups like this that help kind of to dispel some of those stigmas ideally. There's a lot of opportunity there. I would say a tricky thing with this is that I think, in particular, this sort of work is especially dependent on having like a local person spearheading it. In this case, second from the right in the back row is this woman Taguhi. She's 23. She's just like an absolute force in the community, and the kids love her. And she, can like send out 3 messages on Facebook and get 40 kids out to do a project half an hour later. So that would be a tricky thing of working on stuff like this. Is I think this is something especially where you need like an on-the-ground community partner. And then I would just put in a plug for the AGBU, Armenian General Benevolent Union's Bridge for CSOs program. CSOs here is civil society organization. There's also another interesting similar initiative called Together for Armenia, whose focus is on basically connecting diasporan talent with in-country need. So for instance, if you go to Together for Armenia's website and go to their expert section, you can filter it all by where people are, by their expertise, by what communication methods they like. So for instance, if I'm no accounting expert, say Amelia wants to talk to an expert on accounting, we can go to that website, see, oh, there's someone in Glendale who, maybe they don't have the money to come to visit Armenia, but they're free to meet by Skype anytime, and they can talk with us about how to set up an accounting system. So I think it's some really neat initiatives and good use of the world's IT infrastructure, just and the ability to meet and Skype and communicate long distance like that. So those are some of the opportunities. Now I'll just quickly mention a few kind of broad lessons learned from the work. So personal development equals organizational development. In this case I'm talking about this particularly from my perspective, from our very small organization, but there are a lot of organizations like this that are maybe just a few unpaid volunteers. In a lot of cases it's kind of one person in particular's NGO, or it's known that way anyway. Like in our community, if you say to someone, the Margo Hobi Youth Center, they may not necessarily connect it, but then if you say, oh, Amelia's organization, like, oh yeah, Amelia's organization. A lot of small NGOs like this throughout the country, ours not so much, but kind of tend to come in and out of existence based on funding opportunities and grants they have may or may not won. Ours is pretty steady in our work. My point being, if you focus on development on the personal level, you don't have to worry so much about what will happen if those organizations go in and out of existence. Like, if I'm working with Amelia and Mariam here, for instance, this was a strategic planning workshop we had on, say, PowerPoint skills, and we work on their PowerPoint skills. That will very much help our organization, and we're thinking about it from an organizational standpoint. But, if the organization dissolves or if someone moves away, like, those skills aren't going anywhere. Like, and presumably they're still going to be working just as hard wherever they are on community development projects. So that's just the way I try to think about it, because some NGOs can be very, like I said, temporary. Ours not so much, but so focusing on the personal of it and on the individual basis for me is important. Work personal life connections. This is our kitchen. This is Amelia and my host mom and us working on the menu for our 4-day winter camp, which ended up being 10 pages of tightly written Armenian cursive, which I have trouble reading. I'm so bad at reading the cursive. Just working on planning our menu. So particularly in small communities, but even in the cities that I understand from volunteers, the separation between work life and personal life is much, much less than traditionally in the States, for instance. And in my case, basically zero, because I live with my counterpart's parents. She can be over at any point. We are just as likely to be working at 10 a.m. as we are at 6 p.m. Because, there's so many other scheduling constraints in her life. So, yeah. And on that same note, and this is something Peace Corps really instills in us, that, to really think of work in our first 3 or 4 months plus at our community, not in like, you're doing this project and starting this thing, but really just integrating and building trust. And that means maybe just having coffee for 3 months, just having coffee. Like, that is so key to build that rapport with everyone, to build that trust. Because if people don't trust you, if you don't speak the language, at least passively, if you're not willing to just sit and listen and talk about the community and what they need, people aren't going to want to work with you. So, community-based ideas. My point here just being kind of related to the previous slide, that, we can come in with our ideas, but we don't know fully nearly as much what the community needs as people who've lived there forever. In this case, this is, again, from our recent camp that we had. This is Gane Margarian from the Armenia Tree Project, who lives in Margo Hobi. She's local. All the kids love her. She shows up at the camp and she just gets piled on with hugs. She was doing a short afternoon class about global warming and personal environmental responsibility. So people, for instance, did sort of quasi carbon footprint analyses, looking at their family's consumption. So my point here just being to be very, to do the community needs assessment, to take the time to talk to everyone, talk to all the different players in the community, understand who they are, whether that's the school, that's the mayor's office, other folks, in our cases maybe the board of elders, and just making sure that the ideas that you're working on, even if you suggest them as an outsider, because I'm not saying that that's not a really important role for us, that they have that full community support and that people are behind it, because
Where is this taking place?
Sorry, yeah, so this is at just a very small little sort of resort hotel, about a 10-minute drive from our community. Yeah, and this is just in the little meeting room there. So yeah, so as volunteers, we're in our community for a couple years, some people a little longer if they extend. And if the things we work on aren't community backed and ideally initiated, and we leave and they just vanish, that's not ideal. Still good work will be done, but for real sustainability, just focusing on ideas coming from the communities themselves. And then finally, community dynamics and relationships. These are all connected. This is a meeting we had with the school's director in kind of the back right there, and some folks from ATP and a representative from a construction company who ended up doing the construction work on our gym. As I've already talked about a little bit, just kind of understanding the various people at play in your community, understanding how they all work together, and also being very sensitive to everything so you don't potentially in your work compromise these, very important relationships that, bad blood can go on for decades. Like in the village that some of us lived during our training, there were two families who lived next to each other. They shared a garden wall, and they had not been speaking for, I want to say 30 years, because at one point, one family's fruit grew over the wall, and that family took a piece of that fruit and ate it. There were probably other things going on, that's probably not the entire story, but especially in these smaller communities, you have to be very, very aware of these sorts of things. I have a friend who's in a small community, and her NGO director and the school director have a bad relationship, so they can't work with the school, and in a small community that's really unfortunate because they're, such an important resource. So yeah, that's what I have to say about lessons learned. And now just a few random, interesting asides or other things I'd like to talk about. What do you guys think this is? And don't say if you already know, because I know some of you already know. So in Armenia, the zodiac is really big. Especially, this is a clip from a calendar. Last year was the year of the rooster. This year is the year of the dog. I have to say I'm a little disappointed with the year of the dog calendars. They're cute dogs, and that's great, but Rooster Three Musketeers, Rooster Pirate, Rooster's ice skating, these I just find so wonderful. If anyone wants to start an Armenian zodiac calendar import business, I would be very into working with you. A really interesting thing to me as an outsider coming in is the difference in the way people trust each other in Armenia, from my perspective, again, trying not to generalize too much. My perception is that there's less trust in kind of the economic realm, and especially of the state. But for instance, in the economic realm, this is a very common story. Right before Nortari, my host mom went to Bonadzor, bought a kilo of frozen chicken, came home, thawed it weighed 600 grams. And her theory is that when it was raw and fresh, they injected it with water, froze it, so that they can mark up the price like that. And that's just one story, but that sort of thing, I've heard a lot of stories like that I haven't experienced as much in the United States. The flip side of that is I feel like interpersonally, in a lot of ways, there's a lot more trust. One of the ways that I see this a lot is in kind of what I think of as collective parenting. Especially in a smaller community, any tatik, any grandma can pretty much discipline any child. There's that kind of trust that, everyone's looking out for each other. I remember one time I was on the train from Gyumri to Yerevan on a busy night. I think it was a Friday night. And this kid just took off running and screaming from one end of the train down the aisle. And about halfway down, an older woman who clearly did not know the kid just grabbed him and was like, "Wait, you wait for your mom, don't do that." And I was in the US you'd be sued if that happened. If you grab someone else's kid and restrain them, but they're just "Oh yeah, thanks, okay, yeah, I'll get them." So that was interesting. An experience a number of volunteers have had, I haven't, is people, especially older people, coming up to them when they're using an ATM and saying, "Oh, can you help me withdraw money?" And say, "Yeah, okay." And the person gives them their card, they put it in, they say, "Okay, here's my PIN number," and they say, "Okay." I would be "Is this a sting or something? I'm about to arrest it?" Say, "Okay, can you get 50,000 dram out for me?" "Okay, yeah, thank you." And that's it. So that's, whenever I hear those stories, I'm yeah, that would not happen in the U.S. in my experience, or at least in, maybe it's different. I've always lived in cities here. Maybe it's different in rural communities. One last story on the trust realm that I really enjoyed is during our training, not in the village that I was living in, but in a nearby one. Some volunteers were out for a walk, and an old guy who none of them know drives by in his car, kind of sees them and acknowledges them, and then goes up maybe another 100 yards, does a 3-point turn, comes back and like screeches to a halt right in front of them, and I'm like, yes? And he just leans out and hands them a big handful of candy and says like, welcome, have some candy. I have not had that particular experience, but I've been given candy by strangers, I don't know how many times at this point. And I just like to think how like in America, to like little kids, that's kind of like high up on the public enemy list, like don't take candy from strangers, do not take candy from strangers. But in Armenia, if like a stranger hands you candy, like yeah, you absolutely eat it. Like, of course, why wouldn't you? And then just I have some of my favorite idioms that I'd like to share from the language. Generally about donkeys, because for whatever reason Armenia has a bunch of really awesome donkey idioms. This one is not about donkeys, but so to become the New Year's lemonade. You can say to someone if you have not seen them in a while, and the etymology that I understand is like way back in the day, or not that far back, probably 20 years ago, limonat, lemonade, but it's just kind of a general, sweet fruit drink, was kind of more of a delicacy instead of available in any, roadside chanut for cheap these days. So you'd only serve it at Nortari, so it was kind of like telling someone like, oh, like you were like a delicacy, like I only see you rarely. So I like that one a lot. I really like Eshizatkin, which is like on the donkey's Easter, which is kind of the equivalent in English to say like when pigs fly. So like something's absolutely never gonna happen, you're like, oh, Eshizatkin, like on the donkey's Easter. If you want to call someone dumb, you can say Eshiakanjum Knatza, which is they are asleep in the donkey's ear. Don't know the derivation of that one either. And then a very popular one is Eshmi Satki Garunkuga, or if you're in Chirag Mars, Garunkuga, which is don't die donkey, spring will come. I've heard different explanations of this one as to whether it is sarcastic or hopeful. So for instance, like if you're waiting for a marshut near a bus and like, it's not coming, it's 15 minutes late, and the person's like, where is it? Some people will say this means like, oh, it's not gonna come, like, why are you thinking that? And some people say like, oh yeah, don't worry, it'll come. But people really like this one. A couple of volunteers actually have it tattooed on them. It's a very popular one. So, it's just kind of, a few humorous anecdotes and other things. If you have any other idioms that you like, I'll be very happy to hear those later. I even have a little book of idioms that I love. Okay, and so I'll just finish by talking about this range of Peace Corps supported projects we have in the country. So, Girls Leading Our World Camp. This is one of the super awesome projects I mentioned earlier, focusing on young women and girls. GLOW is a worldwide Peace Corps project, like they have it in a bunch of different countries, and I think it's pretty similar across them, but in general it's working on promoting leadership, confidence, civic engagement, rights awareness. Those are kind of the main topics focused on here. Last year, I believe, and most years, it was a week-long camp, kind of traditional summer camp style, overnight, working on this variety of activities, and they have some really exciting expansion plans for this summer, doing more camps and focusing on working in particular with kind of more vulnerable populations, whether that's girls with disabilities or people in kind of particularly rural or cut-off areas. Growing and Renewing Our World, GROW Camp, will be in its third year now. This is an environmental camp. So for this year, they're going to focus on deforestation, climate change, pollution, and ways that people can deal with environmental issues through social entrepreneurship. So a whole lot of really interesting stuff there. Last summer, they partnered pretty heavily with the Armenia Tree Project on this, working with some of ATP's trainers. They're hoping to do that. They might not be able to do quite as much this coming summer, but still, depending on money and budgeting, partner with them because ATP has fantastic trainers and they really know their stuff. I've worked with a lot of them. They're great. Borders to Border. This is a project near and dear to my heart that I helped plan. I think it'll be in its 8th year this year, and the concept of it is a hike across Armenia, teaching health classes along the way. Don't hike across the whole country. Last year we had 3 different groups, 2 starting at the northern border, 1 starting at the southern border, and it's about a 3-week trip, and we meet in Yechignadzor more or less halfway after that time. We taught classes on we had a leadership class, we had one focusing on activism, we had dental hygiene, nutrition, and then exercise. So it's a pretty interesting opportunity to see the country in a very different way, and it also lets us go into a lot of really small communities that might not otherwise have classes like this. So this is the full group. One thing I also forgot to mention about, well, pretty much all of these projects is that we push really hard to have the leadership, the organization be like 50-50 split American Peace Corps volunteers, Armenians, and Armenia. So I think this year it's even more than half Armenians helping plan it, but our year was about 50-50, and the walkers were, I think, about 40% Armenian, 60% Peace Corps volunteers. And this is all of us at the very end. Maybe a head bounce over after 3 tiring weeks. And this is just a shot of, from my group, what one of the classes might look like. So Teaching Our Boys Excellence is one of the really awesome projects I know of that focuses on working with boys and young men. It's a free educational camp for teenagers. Topics are sort of similar to Ngo: leadership, civic engagement, healthy lifestyle. They also talked about sexual health. And like Ngo, it's in a traditional camp setting of an overnight. A really cool feature about it too is that the kids after the camp get a small stipend to implement a small project in their community that they in part plan during the camp. That's anywhere from leading a seminar to doing a trash cleanup to even in some cases, I don't know the specifics, but people use that as kind of money to start a small business or social entrepreneur project. And again, like other projects, this one's pretty much 50-50 Armenian-American planned. We have the National Poetry Recitation Contest, which it's all in English, and it's judged on, in part to, like mastery of the program and having memorized it correctly, but on how it's read as indicating, how you understand it, how you interpret it, did you really dig into the poem and understand it to get the meaning of it. Kids don't have an explanation of it, it's purely they're purely judged based off how they read the poem. This year's theme, it's the 8th year of the contest, and this year's theme is what makes us human. I believe last year, I can't remember last year's, sorry, but the plan is for about 700 contestants to take place in this spring across a range of age groups. And finally, the Peace Corps projects. We have Right On, which is also a Peace Corps that's organized globally. I'm not sure in how many countries, but it was actually started just next door in Peace Corps, Georgia. Part of this project is organizing creative writing programs, creative writing clubs, all in English, ideally with your English clubs or with kids you work with. And then I believe it'll be in February, there are the competitions, which are very decentralized at first, and then kind of over time they get aggregated. We're going to have one in our village and we'll pick a winner, and then there will probably be a Lori Marz competition, and then eventually national competition, and then all the national winners, their pieces get sent to Georgia, who picks a worldwide winner in various age groups. What I really, really like about this project, so again, like I said, it's all in English, people show up, get a prompt, they have an hour. You're judged not at all on grammar and spelling, you're judged completely on creativity and idea, Your grammar and spelling has to be good enough to get the idea across, but you're not penalized at all for those things. It's purely about creativity and the idea you have and how you expressed it. So that's really neat. So all of these projects, if anyone wants more information on them, wants to figure out how they can get involved, if you're interested, I can connect you to the people who are organizing them and know more about them. And I'll just finish by talking about a few other projects I know about or I think are particularly cool. This is a picture from Goals, Girls of Armenia Leadership Soccer, which actually started as a Peace Corps affiliated project and is now its own NGO with full Armenian leadership. They do both soccer leagues around the country. So for instance, we have a team in our village, and the NGO pays for equipment, for transportation for the girls to and from where they play. Our girls play in Dilijan at the international school there that I mentioned. I want to say now there are maybe a dozen leagues throughout the country, at least 8. So that's one aspect of it. It also provides a lot of information for doing after-school clubs that focus on kind of issues of social justice and equality through sport. So you might have an activity that talks about safe spaces and what those are and how those feel. Ones that look at gender equality. and it's girls of Armenia leadership soccer, but the after school clubs are co-ed like that, and ideally is co-ed. So like I said, talking about the work with boys, like ideally you have the boys and girls together working in these activities. So that's a popular one. A friend of mine in Gyumri recently with his organization worked on a project. They got a grant from Friends of Armenia, which is an organization made up of returned Peace Corps volunteers from Armenia, and they made audiobooks for blind people in Gyumri so that they could listen to those. Not able to read conventional books. Just other interesting ones, and then a lot of interesting work in Gyumri. Another friend of mine, her organization got a grant from the European Union to open a cafe that is made to employ people with various disabilities. So a lot of interesting work happening in Gyumri. So yeah, those are some other interesting projects going on in the country. This is Goals, and this is in the International School at Dilijan's beautiful gym. It's the nicest the nicest school I've been in Dilijan. Sorry, yeah. Dilijan. Yeah, about a half hour from us. This is the nicest.
That's the new school that they built?
Yeah, the United World College Dilijan, funded in large part by Idea Foundation. Ruben Vartanian. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it's a beautiful facility, and we do a lot of interesting stuff with their students, kind of on the cultural side of things. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and you can do some questions.
One Mark now. Mark had to go, he's not feeling well. But we thought we would have questions for a while and then break up and just have informal conversation.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay around after this kind of more formal Q&A, so. Yeah, in the back.
Hi, yeah. Thank you. Congratulations. Three quick questions. When you applied for Peace Corps, did you request Armenia or did they come to you? Are you doing this presentation anywhere else nearby? And the third one is, do the Ngo girls get a stipend also like two boys get?
Okay, yeah, so first of all, yes, I applied. Sorry?
Would you repeat?
Yeah, so the first part of that was that I applied to Peace Corps Armenia directly or Peace Corps in general. So now, as of 3 years ago, you can request countries. It used to be you just sent in your application. They said, okay, you're going here. That was the first question. The second question was, am I doing the same presentation anywhere else? And the third question was, do participants in the GLOW camp get a post-camp stipend, like the participants in the To Be camp, the boys equivalent? Okay, first of all, yes, I applied directly to Peace Corps Armenia, in large part because of the Saryan Zurgian family. I grew up with going to school with their daughter and loved hearing about Armenia, and I was interested in that part of the world, and also I wanted to go to like a colder place as opposed to a warmer place. I still have no regrets about that, even in spite of last winter. I'm not doing this exact same presentation anywhere. I mean, I'm happy to anywhere else when I come back if anyone would like me to. But while here, I've also talked to a gathering of ATP supporters, Armenian Tree Project supporters. That was last night, and then on, I believe, Monday, Jason Sohigyan from the Tree Project and I are going to St. Stephen's Armenian Elementary School and talking to some of the kids there, some of the 5th graders who will be going to the country for a visit in May, I believe. And then the third question, so about stipends for GLOW, I believe so, but I can't remember off the top of my head. The information I have here was solicited from the various organizers, so they might, and they just didn't mention it to me. I think they also get stipends, like to be participants, but I can't remember for sure. Yeah.
You may be insulated from this because you're in rural areas, but what's been your interaction with the government? What's their view of Peace Corps volunteers? Have you run into any, not so much political issues, but cultural issues between Eastern thinking, Western thinking, American values being brought in?
Mm-hmm.
What's the attitude of the government toward this whole thing?
Okay, so did everyone hear that question back there?
Not the mayor, by the way, I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
like the higher level, say like, did everyone hear that back there? Okay, that's a complicated question. I don't, and volunteers in general don't have much direct interaction with the Armenian government. That's kind of intentional. Like we're supposed to be like, we are completely apolitical, and we have to be very, very explicit about that. And part of that is like avoiding government functions and that sort of thing. what do I say exactly? So we were told in training that kind of there was some distrust of that, or that kind of idea of like, oh, you're coming in, you're bringing Western values, like, either they'll either conflict with our traditions, or you have, the kind of push and pull between the West and Russia. Someone said, during training that there's a rumor that we're all like CIA agents or something coming in, because the CIA cares what like the pop peaks by the corner store think about the price of like bulgur. That's like high priority. But I honestly, in my experience, haven't just in my personal experience and volunteers I've talked to haven't really reported that, like issues of mistrust in that sense. Maybe there's a mistrust that they're not telling us, but I have definitely never explicitly gotten like, oh, like this work you're doing, like those are Western values, you don't want me here. I've never had that experience. So, yeah.
I noticed you had a yoga class there.
Yeah.
No, I have nothing against yoga. I know Armenian clergymen tend to be very conservative. Have you had any run-ins with them?
I have not in our community, but I do know an example of that is a number of volunteers. Understandably, people want to organize events for Halloween, and I think it really comes down to the feelings of the local clergymen and kind of how you pitch the idea to them of what the holiday is and what you want to do. Like, you emphasize, oh, it's just a fun way to like dress up and like have some do costumes and eat some candy. That works well. I mean, I think some people might view it as like a little like satanic or something like that, in which case, like I do know volunteers who have wanted to do a Halloween event, and that has been
Well, in
denied.
Yerevan, it's caught on. They go trick-or-treat.
Oh yeah. I mean, Yerevan, it's very different, but so I think it's just kind of like, yes, that is a consideration, and I think it really just comes down to the beliefs and the feelings of the local clergymen and how you kind of frame the event to them or whatever you want to do. So.
What is the population, and are you alone, the only Peace Corps volunteer?
In Margahovy?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was on my list and I forgot to mention it. It's a village of just under 4,000 people, so it's a pretty large village. That's at least the population, kind of like the max population on paper. That really fluctuates throughout the year because so many men and sometimes whole families go abroad, especially to Russia, to work. I'm the only person from my group that got there 2 years ago, but I do have what we call site mates. I have a site mate who got there about a year ago and teaches in the school. She's an English teacher. And we do a lot together. She was also a big planner of this camp that we had at the start of December.
Now, all these projects that you showed, youth projects, are you involved in all of those?
In all of these projects at the end that I showed, the Peace Corps projects? Yeah. No. So I helped plan the border-to-border one, and I helped a little bit with the Grow Camp, but this is just kind of the full, more or less the full range of kind of like Peace Corps officially affiliated projects that we have. No, so we have, like I said, 70 volunteers in the country right now.
So you didn't mention much about schools. Did you get involved in schools at all?
Not directly. I mean, we've worked with the school in our community on a number of things. For instance, on the renovation of the gym project. I have fairly little interaction with the school because I don't teach there at all. Like when I do English clubs, it's not in the school building.
But some of the Peace Corps then teach in the school.
Yeah. Of our whole group, 2/3 do actually. So we have a very sizable contingent in the schools. Most of what I know is getting stories from them.
Are you familiar with the COAF SMART program?
Yeah. So I mentioned that.
Schools?
Yeah, I mentioned that briefly, talking about IT stuff. I don't know a whole lot about it. Our village is not a co-op village, but we do have volunteers in co-op villages who work with them, with their smart center, with their smart rooms.
Program.
Yeah, they do a lot of really interesting stuff, and their English camps are top notch. Their English camps are fantastic. I don't know a whole lot about kind of the IT program and the smart room stuff. I mean, I hear good things, but everyone I've talked to in particular says their English camps are just incredible. So yeah.
You said that it's primarily girls and women that are interested in working in these NGO efforts, and we can see that from the pictures. But what are the men and boys doing as time goes on?
They go to Russia.
Like, you mean for employment or kind of as their...
Well, I don't know. Are they employed? Are they going to school? What are they doing instead of them?
Yeah, so I would say the young boys in general just participate in kind of after-school activities across the board, less than girls. Like, what I've said about our NGOs, you know, in the English clubs, like, I don't do English clubs with the younger kids at this point, but the other woman in our community does, and her English clubs are probably 90% girls. So, and I think in general,
90%
90% girls.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's, you're still focusing on all these girls.
Yeah, so what my point being, I think in general, just the boys are a lot less involved in these after-school activities.
Yeah, but
I'm
what
not
are they doing?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure in the cases of like the teenage boys. The older boys, you know, once they've finished school and done their military service, in general, they're either unemployed or they go abroad to work. You know, when I got to the community, my host brother was in Sochi working. He came back, and I say unemployed, but I mean not like officially employed. There's still plenty to do around the house. You know, around. It's an agricultural community, so unless it's the winter, there's always a lot of farm work to do. But it's a lot of going back and forth, or just going and staying in Russia for work. And the work that people do there is primarily construction work. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry I can't speak to a whole lot to like the teenage boys as to.
I suppose,
Yeah.
I suppose a good number of them are in the military service, the boys, the young boys. the
Yeah,
18
yeah, so that's
year
also the
olds and
case.
all.
So once they finish,
And
12th
in
grade,
connection with that, that's a 2-year tour of duty.
it's a 2-year, yeah.
But now, there's a new program, which I think is very creative, which makes it a 3-year option, a 3-year program. But in that 3 years, you get 1 week a month at home. So
Really?
you go
Okay.
back home and you get paid
Mm-hmm.
for the transportation round trip to
Mm-hmm.
go home, which is a benefit. And if you sign up for 3 years, the
Yeah.
3rd year. And at the same time, they give you some training in your field of interest, whatever
Okay,
it happens to
interesting.
be, so that you develop skills. And once you leave the Army at the end of 3 years, hopefully you can get a local job instead of
Okay.
having to go to Russia. Very well conceived
Yeah, it's an
plan.
interesting
It's a
program.
new program of the Ministry of Defense.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that, but that's yeah.
What about sports for the boys
Yeah,
before they enter the military?
like do we do sports programs
Is
for
there,
them?
are there
or-
schools, do they have soccer,
Yeah, so.
gymnastics, they used to?
Yeah, well, so that's one of the really exciting things about the fact that we have a totally renovated gym now. I guess I didn't include a picture there of the finished project, but it's beautiful. And our community winter can be up to 6 months long, so the fact that we have this indoor space where, you know, ideally everyone, but definitely boys, you know, we have basketball, volleyball, they play football in there.
Gymnastics.
Yeah, there's definitely some gymnastics too. Karate's really big, as I mentioned. One of the women, Elena, I work with, teaches all the boys. I believe there's also wrestling. I haven't seen the wrestling class, but I think we have it in our village. But then we're also quite close to Volunteerism, so there's even more kind of sports opportunities there for people to go to clubs there to participate in sports.
And what about the chess?
Chess.
Isn't it mandatory?
Yeah, so chess is taught, I believe, 2nd through 4th grade. Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. I think it's the only country in the world that mandates teaching of chess to all kids in schools, and Armenians are very rightfully incredibly proud of their chess masters and chess champions. Huh? Sorry?
Does the Peace Corps go to Russia?
Not anymore, no. They were there for I think a few years in the 90s.
Is there any place where they don't go besides North Korea and?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how many throughout the world, but I want to say right now we're maybe in something like 50 countries. I should have written that number down. But for instance, we had a program in Azerbaijan until 2014, and the government asked them to leave. I'm not sure exactly why.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. My uncle's here. He's been a Peace Corps volunteer twice in Kenya and Bangladesh, and they pulled out of Bangladesh in early 2000s.
Yeah, after 9/11.
Yeah, after 9/11. So kind of, you know, programs get opened, programs get closed. Some programs get opened and closed kind of based on the political ebb and flow in the country.
With all that beautiful snow, don't you teach them cross-country skiing or?
Someone asked me that yesterday. It would be an absolutely perfect place for that. I'm not a big skier, but if I were and I had skis, that would be an absolute heaven.
YouTube.
Huh?
I said, just put it in YouTube.
Yeah.
What's the altitude?
The altitude, it's a pretty high up village. It's just under 6,000 feet. So it's pretty cold up there, and a lot of snow. Yeah, back there.
Yeah, I'm curious what you view your career path, you know, like, going into the Peace Corps, like, what's your view of where you're going?
Yeah.
And just as an aside, I'm wondering how much time off you get while you're,
Yeah.
you know, working in Armenia.
So I'm not totally sure. My plan is for next fall to go to grad school locally, either in urban planning or public policy, apply to some programs. After that, I'm really not sure. I'm interested in so many different things, from like housing stuff to transportation to food access. It's both kind of like a positive and a negative, in that it's like I'd be happy in any of those things, but it also makes it a little hard to like pick one right now. And leave, so we accrue 2 days of annual leave per month, which is pretty good in total. So in total, in the 2 years, you get 48 days of leave. You can't use that in the first 3 months of your service or in the last 3 months. Like, they don't want you traveling either of those. The first 3 months you're supposed to be there integrating, like really there, and then the last 3 months, you know, you're going so soon they want you likewise to be there for that whole time. So, but you know, yeah, I've been able to travel to a number of different places throughout Europe, and I'm here for 2 weeks, which is pretty nice.
About the border-to-border project, you said that you stopped by in different communities or towns or whatever, and a bunch of stuff. Did you coordinate those things in advance? Or?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was one of the program managers, and it was a 8-month planning process. Yeah, involving site visits and weekly calls to school directors and coordinating host families for the villages and routes between them, and figuring out where we had to take taxis because we didn't want to walk through a mile-long tunnel. And it was a very long and interesting planning process. Learned a lot about different parts of the country.
So you have contacts at every place?
Yeah. Yeah. Whether generally school directors, we would generally teach in schools. We would also, in larger communities where there were NGOs, teach through an NGO. And in a lot of the communities, probably about half of them, there was a Peace Corps volunteer there, because that helped us, you know, with finding a place to stay, having a liaison to the school or NGO. So.
Were they receptive?
Hmm?
Were they
receptive? Yeah, on the whole, yeah. A couple of times. The only issue we had with that was sometimes the marz pets, like the regional governors. This year they're making a much more concerted push to like clear everything with them beforehand, but occasionally, you know, they would have some issue with it. It was mostly they just didn't know what they were doing, so I'd be like, why are you doing this? But in pretty much all cases, we got those resolved with some phone calls. I think in one case in marz, a volunteer in the community we were staying in, her host brother was like the vice marz pet. It's such a small world, you know. You're never that far from the person you need to call, so you know, we worked it out with some phone calls that way. Yeah.
I'm just curious, let's say one of us is in Armenia for the summer, the whole summer, if we have the luxury of time to be there that long. Is there an office where you can go and offer to be volunteer, or is that something that you have to be picked up from here and somewhere?
Yeah, so not through the Peace Corps. I mean, if you were interested in getting involved in one of these projects I mentioned, I don't know what exactly that would look like. You know, for each project it would be different, but I could connect you with those people. For folks, I can't remember what the age limit is. I want to say it's around 30. There's Birthright Armenia, which organizes volunteers going over there, I think from anywhere from a month to pretty much as long as they want to. But I think the kind of standard stint is a month to 4 months. Yeah.
The Birthright office they have an office, and you can go to the office and you can tell them what exactly what you would like to do, and they can look at the programs available at that time. Yeah.
I mean, in a case like that, it's probably best that you like email way beforehand. Like I don't know if you can just show up and say like, get me somewhere.
Yeah.
Like they have.
No, actually,
but up in
they
there,
do.
It's a beautiful
they do.
office.
Actually,
okay.
Because that's what we kind of we encountered that this summer.
Cool.
And they said you can come to our office and
really
we can put you in contact with different programs that they need volunteers. So that option is available.
Okay, I didn't realize you could just, that's awesome. Yeah, because they have a very welcoming, I've been to the office a couple of times and they're very welcoming.
Actually, for like Birthright Armenia is mostly for the younger, as you mentioned. But for older guys like me, you know, so Armenian Volunteer Corps is the source. And that's a sister group to Birthright Armenia. They're within the same building, same office area, and their information is online on Armenian Volunteer Corps, and you can connect with them, and they're really encouraging everybody to connect with them and go to Armenia.
Judy Laura did through Armenia Volunteer Corps, was it
Yeah,
through Birthright?
Laura was with my daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They were
Okay.
in Gyumri together.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And I
yeah,
think
she's
it was combined, so it's Armenian Volunteer
Yeah.
Corps and Birthright
And, yeah.
when you're 30 and younger.
Mhm.
Because
That's what it
Birthright
is,
helps,
okay.
Birthright provides some language
Yeah.
classes and things.
Mhm.
And they also provide a stipend to pay your way.
Yeah.
But with Armenian Volunteer Corps, you can do that at any age,
Okay.
but they won't provide you the same
Yeah.
stipend.
Okay.
But even that's what, because Sevan told us that if you come here, you're staying here for a longer time and you want to get involved with some sort of a program, just come to the office. Even if we don't have anything, we will put you in contact with people that
Yeah.
they are looking for volunteers. So we need people.
Yeah. And also, so the initiatives that I mentioned, the AGB used Bridge for CSOs and Together
Yeah.
for Armenia. In a case like that, if you had like a really specific skill that you think, like, for instance, an Armenian NGO might benefit from, you can put yourself on the website and say, you know, I'm willing to come to the country. So if they want a couple weeks of really intense help on strategic planning, or, you know, like getting their accounting practices in order, whatever your skill set is, that's a really cool way to do that too. That's a newer program.
And there were always, one of the things is that, excuse me, but there are other new programs starting, because while I was there was this group that they started with the Battered Women Chapter, which is a totally new.
Is that the Lighthouse Project?
I'm not sure exactly, because I met the person who was getting involved with that, and this is a new thing. And then there is another one with the autistic children. They just started with the autistic. So there are always new programs coming, and sometimes while you're there, if you get in touch with people, they will put you in contact with different groups that they might need extra help, even for a short period of time,
Yeah.
which I think is fantastic with the.
Yeah, we have time for another question.
Yeah, maybe take two more questions.
Two more questions,
and
the other two, yeah.
Is the Peace Corps in Artsakh?
No, no, and as volunteers, we were not allowed to go to Artsakh. Well, we were volunteers. I'm definitely gonna go to visit after I finish. I'm excited to see it. Yeah?
Hi, is there a debriefing after you finish there, and do you have any recommendations that you give when you're going to leave, and what those recommendations might be to the government?
Yeah, to the Armenian government?
No,
To the US government?
Peace Corps.
To Peace Corps. Yeah, so not at the very, very end, but we have about 3 months before we finish what's called our close of service conference. I haven't had that yet, I think it's in a month or so. Part of that is looking back at our experiences, reflecting on it, talking about that, but there's definitely also a big part of that is giving feedback to Peace Corps on like what worked well in our placement, what didn't, what worked well about the trainings, what were we not well prepared for. So that's kind of the formal time to do it. At the same time, it's like we all know the staff very well and are in and out of Yerevan for business and socializing frequently and go to the office, and it's a small place, so you know, anytime I wanted I could just drop in and talk to the country director if I had an idea or feedback or
How many Peace Corps
constructive
volunteers are in Armenia?
70. Spread across 2 years and split between the two sectors. So
And how many centers?
how many,
Centers.
like,
In other words, how many stations are there?
probably, well, so in each of kind of the main cities, like Monazor, Gyumri, Sisian, Kapan, there are multiple volunteers. Gyumri, I want to say, has 5 volunteers. And then apart from that, it's all villages. My village is kind of a rare case. I think I'm the only like village that has multiple volunteers. So I'd say in total, I guess would be maybe we're in 40 communities. But then also, you know, there are communities that will have a volunteer and then have one 5 years later, or have a volunteer and never have one again, or something like that. So in total of like the total number of communities that have had a Peace Corps volunteer throughout the program's existence there, I'm not sure, but it's a lot higher. So, one more question?
Yeah. Okay, last
Last
one,
question.
final, yeah.
I just wanted to ask the ages, you're younger, but I know do they
Mhm.
still take older people as well?
Oh, yeah.
Is there
Yeah,
variety?
so actually in the picture that I had, yeah.
Yeah.
So these folks here, yeah, what did I do? Oops. Well, the picture was there and you saw it. I would say, sorry, there we go. So this is Charlie and Susan. Charlie is in his mid-70s now, I think, and I want to say Susan's a decade younger. Charlie, so there's kind of a really interesting small community of American expats I've met through Peace Corps whose basically retirement is to just do Peace Corps. Armenia for Charlie was his 6th Peace Corps stint, and in April he's actually headed back to Peace Corps Georgia for the 2nd time. And Susan is I think kind of at the start of her retirement through Peace Corps. But it's people of all ages. It's definitely, in my group, probably at least half, 2/3 of us are in our 20s, early 30s. We have some folks, kind of in their 40s, but then there's also, it kind of picks up again, late 50s and then kind of retiree age. So, there's definitely, there are certain, depending on the country, there are certain countries you can't go to if you have very specific health needs or health requirements. And the older volunteers in Armenia tend to get placed in the urban centers closer to health services that they might need. But yeah, there's no age limit. I read, there was a New York Times article not too long ago where I think it was about the oldest volunteer in the world who was like 82, 83. So, yeah, no limit.
Well, I just, yeah, please, that was really excellent. We really appreciate all the work you're doing. I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone in saying that, and your mastery of Armenian idioms. A really excellent, lucid presentation.
Thank
so, please stick around. We have more to eat, and you can interact with Nick a little bit more.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you guys again all for coming.
So you're going to Grassroots.